Seclusion before birth, silence, ritual, and the fate of a queen in the vast stone halls of medieval palaces, where every footstep echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. The life of a queen was bound by strict etiquette, ceremony, and tradition. Yet among the grand feasts, diplomatic audiences, and the glitter of jewels, there came a moment when the crown's splendor yielded to the primal power of nature. This moment was known as seclusion, a voluntary, though ritual-laden, withdrawal from public life before the birth of a child. Several weeks before the expected delivery date, sometimes a full month or more, the queen would retire behind the closed doors of a special chamber, a sanctuary known in some courts as the birthing room. Men, even the highest-ranking courtiers, were forbidden entry, and the queen entered a world ruled entirely by women. The chamber was prepared with painstaking care. Heavy tapestries lined the walls to keep out the cold and muffle any drafts. Windows were draped in thick curtains, letting in only the softest, muted light, or sometimes no daylight at all. In some traditions, it was believed that too much sunlight could startle the unborn child. The air was heavy with the fragrance of dried herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for protection, sage and wormwood to ward off evil spirits. This was not merely comfort, it was a complex blend of medicine and superstition, a centuries-old ritual meant to shield mother and child from the dangers of birth. Around her, the queen was attended by her closest ladies-in-waiting, women who formed a protective circle of care and secrecy. This was a hidden world, far from the noise and politics of the great hall. Days were filled with prayer, quiet conversation, embroidery, and the soft strumming of a lute or harp. At times, a lady would read aloud from the Psalms or from the chronicles of past queens, offering inspiration or reassurance. Yet beneath the warmth and sisterhood, there was an undercurrent of anxiety, for childbirth in the Middle Ages was perilous even for those surrounded by wealth and the best physicians of the realm. Seclusion was more than a matter of health, it carried deep political significance. The unborn child was not merely a blessing, he or she could determine the fate of kingdoms. A living heir could secure the dynasty, seal alliances, and prevent war. The loss of mother or child, on the other hand, could plunge a nation into crisis, fuel rival claims to the throne, and unravel years of careful diplomacy. Thus, seclusion was as much a symbolic safeguard as it was a medical precaution. If the queen's pregnancy was smooth, the seclusion might begin only 2 weeks before labor, but at the first signs of fatigue, breathlessness, pain, or what midwives called ill omens, the retreat could begin much earlier, lasting long, quiet weeks before the birth. Inside the birthing chamber, life took on its own rhythm. The ladies whispered court gossip in hushed tones, careful not to disturb their sovereign. Servants moved silently, bringing warmed milk, herbal infusions, or bowls of broth. Sometimes healers or wise women would be admitted, performing rituals for an easier labor, tying knots in cords, murmuring protective charms, burning incense to drive away unseen threats. It was a delicate blend of Christian prayer and ancient pagan rites, both existing side by side in the candlelit stillness. When the time finally came, the room changed. Curtains were drawn tighter, the number of attendants reduced. Only the midwives, the queen's trusted women, and a few noble witnesses remained. Their role was not to help, but to verify the legitimacy of the child, a safeguard against rumors of substitution, which were not unheard of in the ruthless world of dynastic politics. After the birth, the queen did not immediately resume her royal duties. She entered another phase, the period of purification or churching. Only after a formal blessing in the chapel could she once again appear in public, preside over audiences, and attend ceremonies. Until then, she remained in her private chambers, recovering her strength and bonding with her newborn. Thus, behind the high walls and heavy doors of the royal palace, In a world scented with herbs and dimmed by thick curtains, not only a child was born, but the future of a kingdom. Seclusion before birth was a time of silence, prayer, superstition, and hope. It was a ritual where the fate of one woman was intertwined with the destiny of an entire realm. Royal births in public view, when bringing an heir into the world, was a state event in the courts of medieval and early modern Europe. The birth of a royal child was far more than a family milestone. It was a matter of national security and political legitimacy. The arrival of an heir meant stability for the realm, the continuation of a dynasty, and the prevention of bloody succession disputes. But with such high stakes came deep suspicion, and in an age of relentless intrigue, no ruler could risk whispers of deceit. To ensure that the new heir was truly the child of the queen and king, royal births were often conducted in the presence of numerous witnesses, sometimes dozens, occasionally even over 100. The chamber of labor became a stage, and the birth itself a performance, with nobles, high-ranking clergy, court ladies, and foreign ambassadors assembled not out of compassion, but as living guarantees of legitimacy. When the queen's labor began, the news spread quickly through the palace. Courtiers were summoned, envoys were discreetly invited, and guards were stationed at the door to prevent anyone from entering or leaving without permission. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the glow and scent of beeswax candles, the muffled rustle of silk gowns, and the faint, anxious whispers of those waiting for the child's arrival. The queen, often pale and exhausted, lay surrounded by her closest ladies-in-waiting, who attended to her needs, but also served as observers from the first signs of labor to the final moment. Their role was not just to help, but to ensure that the child who emerged was the same one carried in her womb. No substitutions, no tricks. Along the walls, nobles and dignitaries kept their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Some clutched rosaries and prayed silently. Others, less pious, glanced at each other in uneasy anticipation. Every gasp, every cry, was a reminder that this was not just childbirth, it was the sealing of a kingdom's fate. At last, the first wail of the newborn pierced the heavy air. The room shifted from tense stillness to sudden life. Women moved forward to inspect the infant. A priest stepped forward to bless the child, and royal scribes recorded the precise moment of birth in official registers. If the child was male, the announcement would ripple through the palace like a wave, bringing relief to loyalists and sending a silent warning to potential rivals. The succession was secure. For the queen, however, the moment was far more complex. Amid her physical pain and exhaustion, she had endured the scrutiny of dozens of eyes, the pressure of dynastic expectation, and the awareness that her most intimate experience had been transformed into a public ceremony. In those moments, her body was not her own, it was an instrument of politics, and her privacy had been sacrificed to the needs of the crown. When the witnesses finally departed, they carried with them more than the memory of a birth. They held a political truth, one they could swear to in court or before a foreign ruler. They had seen the child with their own eyes, and could vouch for its parentage. This testimony could mean the difference between a peaceful succession and a war for the throne. Royal births in public view were not acts of spectacle for entertainment, but acts of statecraft. They were ceremonies of proof, designed to guard the monarchy against the ever-present threat of deceit. In these charged hours, the personal and the political became inseparably intertwined, and the cry of a newborn could echo through the corridors of history for generations. Rituals during labor, magic, food, and the protection of the unborn. In the world of medieval childbirth, pain and uncertainty were constant companions, and medicine was often intertwined with superstition. Long before the scientific understanding of obstetrics, women in labor found themselves surrounded not only by midwives and attendants, but by ancient customs and mystical rites intended to safeguard both mother and child. Among these curious traditions was the offering of food, most often cheese or butter marked with strange, sacred inscriptions. These were not ordinary snacks meant for sustenance. On their pale surfaces, the midwife or a local wise woman would carefully inscribe sequences of letters and numbers, arcane combinations drawn from religious texts, charms, or even fragments of astrology. The symbols might be carved with the tip of a knife, pressed into the soft butter with a clean stick, or written with natural dyes. To the medieval mind, these signs were far more than decoration. They were believed to carry protective power, forming a barrier against evil spirits, curses, and the unseen forces that might harm the unborn child. Once the magical markings were complete, the food was presented to the laboring woman. She was encouraged to eat it slowly, allowing the protective signs to enter her body, becoming part of her own flesh and blood. In this way, the blessing or spell was thought to pass directly to the child, shielding it from harm during the perilous passage into the world. The chamber itself would be thick with symbolism, holy relics resting on a table, charms hanging above the bed, perhaps even whispered incantations from women who had seen countless births. The combination of ritual and nourishment was believed to strengthen not only the body, but the spirit, a reminder that childbirth was not merely a physical trial, but a battle waged on mystical ground. Though to modern eyes this may seem like quaint superstition, for those living in a time of high infant mortality and limited medical knowledge, these rituals were acts of hope and defiance against fate. Each bite of the blessed cheese or butter was more than food. It was a prayer you could swallow, a tangible piece of faith meant to carry both mother and child safely across the most dangerous threshold of life. Rituals with the newborn, salt, honey, and the first touch of life in the flickering light of the birthing chamber, as the cries of the mother gave way to the thin, tremulous wail of a newborn. The work of the midwife was far from over. The delivery might have been successful, but in the medieval world, the real journey, the perilous crossing from the womb into life, was only beginning. It was in these first fragile moments that ancient rituals came into play, acts passed down through generations, part medicine, part magic. One of the most curious and enduring customs was the anointing of the newborn with salt and honey. To the medieval mind, salt was no mere seasoning, it was a sacred preservative, a purifying element thought to ward off corruption and evil spirits. Honey, in turn, was the essence of sweetness and vitality, a gift of nature linked to health, long life, and divine blessing. The midwife, experienced in both the practical and the mystical, would take a pinch of clean salt and mix it with fresh honey in a small dish. Then, with hands that had ushered countless lives into the world, she would gently rub the mixture over the child's delicate skin, murmuring quiet words, sometimes prayers, sometimes charms meant to shield the infant from misfortune. The salt would purify, sealing the child against illness. The honey would nourish and protect, symbolizing the hope that life would be sweet rather than bitter. But the ritual did not end there. The midwife would take a drop of pure honey and rub it carefully onto the baby's gums. In a time when infant survival was uncertain, this act was more than symbolic. It was believed to strengthen the child, to give it a taste of life's bounty from the very first breath. To the watching family, it was a promise, a blessing, and a silent plea to whatever powers might be listening: let this child live, let it thrive. Around them, the chamber smelled faintly of warm honey, the tang of salt, and the lingering scent of labor. Outside, the world was cold and uncertain, but here, in this intimate circle of women and newborn, an ancient tradition was playing out, one that blurred the line between healing and enchantment, between earthly care and spiritual safeguard. Though such customs might seem strange today, in the medieval mind they were acts of fierce love. To rub a baby's skin with honey and salt was to shield it from the unseen dangers of a harsh world, and to begin its life wrapped, quite literally, in the sweetness and strength that every parent wished for their child. Royal childcare, the lady of the household. In the medieval royal courts, the life of a future monarch rarely began in the warm embrace of their mother's arms. Instead, the infant's earliest days were entrusted to a carefully chosen woman known as the lady of the household or royal governess. This was not a mere servant, but a lady of impeccable lineage, refined manners, and an unblemished reputation. She was selected not only for her ability to care for the child's physical needs, but for her skill in shaping character, speech, habits, and even posture from the very first days. The lady of the household became almost a second mother, surrounding the royal child with constant attention and guidance. She would rise with the infant, oversee feeding, decide who was permitted to play with the young heir, and carefully control what words, stories, and ideas reached their ears. Even the earliest lessons, from memorizing prayers to mastering proper etiquette, often came from her. Her chambers were always close to the nursery, so she could be near at any moment. She was expected to blend tenderness with discipline, and she could scold even a future king or queen if the rules of decorum were broken. Her influence was profound, often leaving traces on the monarch's manners, values, and governing style well into adulthood. Choosing the right lady of the household was a matter of state. Advisors, royal relatives, and the queen herself might debate fiercely over who was worthy of such responsibility. The upbringing of the heir was not a private matter, it was an investment in the stability and future of the entire realm. And so, in the quiet, candlelit rooms of the royal nursery, history itself was shaped not through battles or politics, but through the gentle, guiding hand of a single woman.